everyone, welcome back to Hannah White and Friends, the podcast about living abroad. If you live abroad, or you love to travel, or you are interested in different countries and cultures, this podcast is for you. Also, if you always wanted to live abroad, but you haven't found the courage yet, this podcast might inspire you. Just follow me on Instagram or hit the bell button in Spotify to get updated on new episodes. Listen to Hannah Worldwide and Friends on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. Hi everyone, please welcome with me Richard Brown from South Africa. Richard was born and raised in South Africa by British parents before they moved to New Zealand in 1998. He studied law and has a great knowledge about legal topics like immigration, property and estate. Today we might get an insight of the life of an immigration lawyer of New Zealand. Hi Richi.
Hi Hannah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking your time, driving all the way to Hamilton, and I was really looking forward to this conversation. I'm super excited to hear about your personal story, especially being an immigrant yourself, but also about your experience work-related, being an immigration lawyer, having studied law and just knowing in general a lot of different topics. But of course, specifically the topic immigration is what here in this podcast is kind of like an interest of a lot of people.
Yeah, so, I'd imagine a lot of your listeners would be quite interested in that.
Yes.
Especially people who have recently moved here and perhaps are on various visas and want to go on a different visa. I certainly have some information about that.
Yeah, I really can't wait to dive into that topic deeper. But before we start talking about that, and I also have a couple of questions the audience was actually asking, so I will bring up their questions as well. But before that, I would love to learn a little bit more about your personal story and about your kind of immigration journey.
Sure. So I came to New Zealand in 1998. I was born and raised in South Africa. I was only 6 years old when I made the journey across. I was born to British parents, and I have two sisters who are a good 10 years older with me, and they made the journey to New Zealand with me. They were a little bit sadder about leaving South Africa than I was, given that I was just a child at the time. I hadn't really built any close connections with, I had friends and things as you usually would have in your home country, but making the move was less emotional than it was for other members of my family, for sure. But coming to New Zealand, I really loved living here, and growing up here has been great. I really embraced the Kiwi culture. I certainly considered myself a Kiwi since moving over here. Yeah,
that's really cool. And especially I have gotten to know quite a few people from South Africa, really different backgrounds. Some came over as a child as well, and they have not too many roots there anymore, except maybe grandparents living there, but also some just recently moving over, and they, of course, miss their home country in a different way. Do you remember why your parents decided to leave first the UK to come over to South Africa, and then why they decided from South Africa to move to New Zealand?
So I believe they wanted a fresh start in terms of leaving UK to come to South Africa. They had two young children, my sisters, and basically I think they were just looking for a fresh start and a fresh opportunity in a new country that they've heard good things about at the time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people were doing that from the UK, going from the UK, from Holland and other countries in Europe over to South Africa. And I believe there was a good employment opportunity for my father down there. He worked for Volkswagen for a number of years, right. And it was a good life over there. But ultimately, if anyone knows about South Africa's history, and it's quite a dark and messy history, things started getting worse over there. You know, it's terrible history in South Africa with what's happening, and I think it's getting worse and worse. But basically, there was a lot of crime being committed over there.
Yeah.
And there was less opportunity for people such as myself and my family to find work over there. And my parents sensed that and realized that and decided, like many other people living there, that it was a good time to move to another country. And they had to choose between, going back to the UK, coming to New Zealand, or Canada or Australia, or one of those countries. So, we made the big journey to New Zealand.
Yeah. Do you remember why specifically New Zealand was the choice?
I'm not too sure. I think ultimately, I believe it's probably due to the fact that my father had a work opportunity here in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he probably would have looked at places like Canada or the UK again, but ultimately New Zealand was the one that had was the best choice because of that work opportunity.
Yeah. How many years were your parents living in South Africa before they decided to move again?
It was a good, I think 20 to 30 years. I can't really put a good date on it, but it was I think it might have actually only been 20 years. Yeah. My sisters were quite young at the time when they moved over, and then obviously I was born, and then with the way the country was going, it was time to leave at that point. Yeah.
Wow, you really have like a massive age gap to your sisters.
Yeah, 10 years difference. We used to get on quite well back then, but obviously with such a big age gap, it's a little bit different now, but big gap.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that they found a country where they felt good and safe, because I hear a lot about South Africa, and it's usually always around that topic of safety, and the criminal activities over there are just getting more and more, and people generally don't feel safe in the whole, it's just the randomness of the crimes that are happening over there. There's there's a lot of instability, a lot of corruption happening there, a lot of power cuts, and it's just not a stable environment to raise a family there. So my family and a lot of other families, they've decided to get out. Of course, there's people who just choose to stay because for whatever reason they love their land, they love their culture, their people. Ultimately that's a decision that they have to make at the end of the day. But certainly for our future, we decided that New Zealand was the best place to be. Yeah. And since I'm here as well, I can tell, yes, here's some crime as well, or we have seen a rise in ram raids and broken into cars, like it happens everywhere and all the time. Would you think that as a lawyer, do you have an idea of statistics, if it's actually going up here in New Zealand as well, or if it's just more media presence, if it's actually not that much more?
So with the crime rate in New Zealand, and this is not coming from the perspective of a lawyer, because I'm not really a criminal lawyer. I don't do criminal law, although I have done a bit of criminal stuff in my immigration practice when I've helped clients who have, they might commit a small crime to help them get a character waiver for their visa. But in terms of the way crime rates have been increasing in New Zealand, I do think there has been an increase in crime, and that's probably down to poverty increasing in New Zealand. With inflation going up the way it is now, I think a lot of people are becoming, they're seeing what's happening around them, seeing the cost of everything going up, and they're basically coming to the mentality that, screw this, screw the rules.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want to do. And I think that's a big mentality in terms of why some of these people are like this. Now, I just want to preface that by saying that obviously there's a lot of poor people who will never commit any crimes. They're lovely people. But certainly there's people who are looking at the world and thinking, there's these other groups of people out there that are making so much money. They're doing so well. I can never reach that, or I don't think through the normal way, like getting an education, going to work, I don't think I can ever reach that kind of wealth. I don't think I can ever own a property in New Zealand. And so they're turning to crime because of that mentality. Yeah. Because, yeah, it's just people are doing it very tough at the moment.
Yeah.
But like I said, obviously there's lots of poor people that are very lawful and would never do that anyway.
Yeah. Thank you for that insight. But coming back to your experience of being an immigrant, do you think when you came as a child, it was way easier for you to then find friends and feel like you are part of a new country, or did you feel
growing up, I certainly did find, made lots of friends in school, and it was a lot easier, definitely, compared to as an adult. But still, New Zealand's a strange country because obviously I've travelled overseas before. I've on one of my last big Europe trips, I visited 17 countries in Europe.
And when amazing.
Thanks. When I was over there, I just was amazed by how, people connect over there, how much easier it is to connect with people than it is to connect with other people here in New Zealand. And the reason I say that is because there's just so many more people in the Northern Hemisphere than there is in the Southern Hemisphere. Yeah. I think I was reading a statistic recently that said that 90% of the world's population are in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And we only have 10% in the Southern Hemisphere. So, and you take it to a small country even further, if you take it even further to a small country like New Zealand, that's a tiny, minuscule amount. We have so much space here.
Yeah.
And there's so less opportunity for people to connect and to have deep, meaningful conversations with each other. Yeah. Growing up here, I found that the New Zealand culture is, we have this saying, she'll be right, and we have that sort of mentality that it's sort of less about forming those deep connections and more just, how should I say it? It's more just very interpersonal, I think. But that's just the way I see it. Obviously, you can form deep connections with people here if you really put the effort in. But sometimes people are not really, they're not really willing to engage that much with other people to form those deep bonds on a friendship level or a relationship level. And it's kind of sad, really, because when I went overseas, when I was traveling, I was constantly meeting people and having a good time with people, and it was great. But here it is a lot harder just because it's a smaller country and everyone's so spread out.
Yeah. I actually heard it quite often from other people as well, from other immigrants, but also from Kiwis themselves, that they also think it's harder to build connections here and to actually, if they already have a group of friends, it's hard for someone else to get into it, which of course we know it's not everyone. Like when I just think back on one of our friends, we have a mutual friend. He was always open to everyone. He has a lot of international friends and is now living overseas himself. So not everyone is like that. But really often they grow up, have their people, and then they don't really need anyone else. They have their close circle of friends from high school or from intermediate or whenever. And then that's all they need. That's all they know. And they don't necessarily need more friends coming in. While, as you said, for me, okay, I might be different anyways. For me, I could never have enough good and deep connections. And I love going into that really deep level of conversations. And I want to know how a person feels, and I want to know what's really going on in them to build these strong and deep connections, to actually build meaningful, long-lasting friendships. And I have a few like that here as well. But I do know that a lot of people struggle actually finding those friends here.
Yeah, I think the struggle growing up here is that you build these connections in school and high school, but people get on with their own lives, and they might move to a different city, they might move to a different country. There's been a lot of that happening recently, especially in New Zealand. We've got a bit of a brain drain happening at the moment. It's when people move away that obviously those friendship and those links, they break down. And we have this amazing technology in the world which connects people through Facebook and social media and through video phone calls, but it's just not quite the same as meeting someone in person and spending time with them in person, which it's a bit of a shame when that happens, and people grow apart, and obviously they communicate less with each other because everyone's on their own journey and their own path.
That's true. And I do agree. It's great to have all these social media and connections, and we are able to see each other via video call. but it's not the same, and it would be so much nicer to actually open up again, having these connections and conversations in person. And I'm really hoping that New Zealand will open up a little bit, just like their mentality, letting people in. But as mentioned before, I have met a lot of people here as well, which were so welcoming and so open. And I don't want to generalize it, but I think especially certain groups of people, they stick together and they don't really let many people in that close circle. So it can be hard. But since you were growing up here, going to school, building good friendships, groups of people, what made you actually go into law? Is there any particular moment, or did you think...
So at the end of high school, towards the end of high school, because I basically had to decide what I was going to do, what my future was going to look like. And I'm quite a creative person. I enjoy writing and reading and music. But the problem with New Zealand is that we're not very an arty country, unlike places like France and Italy and so forth. So there's not really much areas, or if there is, it's very small. The film industry, it's very hard to get into. It's very hard to get into writing scripts and things like that. So I knew I was very good with words and language, and especially in terms of communicating those ideas in writing. So I was thinking to myself, I'm not very good at maths. I'm not very good at science so much. So what's an area of where I can use the English language to help people? And obviously that was law at the end of the day, because as its most basic premise, all law really is taking the right words and putting them in the right order. So I can figure that much out at least. So that's why I decided to go to uni and study law.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it, to be honest.
It's a lot more complicated than that, but if you really want a basic premise of it, then that's a good way to see it.
Yeah, I really like it. And especially you knowing yourself so well that you are interested in writing and you think you're good at this, and then knowing, and I agree, New Zealand has way less opportunity in going into all these creative jobs.
Yeah.
Not that you can't get into it, but it's less opportunity.
Yeah, especially if you want to make money in that particular field and use it get into it as a profession. Yeah.
Exactly. So actually using your skills to get into law and then helping people is really cool. So also immigration law is just one area of that part, right? But what made you specifically focus on this for a while, and probably you will get back into it more again?
Yeah, so you don't really have much of a choice as a graduate coming out of law school.
Yeah.
You basically have to send out your application, your CV out to a bunch of law firms and see who picks you up.
Yeah.
Because, law firms, especially back then, this was shortly after the 2008 financial credit crunch, the financial crisis.
Yeah.
So jobs were in low supply. So, it did take a while to find a law job just after, getting my degree and also getting my professional credentials in order to do law. But yes, actually a law firm here in Hamilton picked me up, and I was actually involved in doing trust law first of all. Yeah. But it was only a fixed term contract, so I was only in there for 3 months.
Yeah.
It was a big firm, one of Hamilton's bigger firms here, but and I was a little bit swamped by all the work and a little bit taken aback by how much all the corporate side of everything, because basically in that particular law firm there was different teams responsible for different jobs. And I was in the trusts and estates team. So it was a good learning curve to get involved into a law practice.
Yeah.
But after my fixed term contract ran out, I then had to look for someone else. And thankfully, my family knew a particular person who was looking for a worker. And they primarily did immigration law and some criminal and some employment law.
Yeah.
So I went with, I had an interview with this person, and we did immigration law together. So it was a very small law firm, but we focused on quality, and 90% of our clients had successful applications. So I was really pleased to be able to help the director out in terms of helping migrants come into the country and also stay in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think or how did it feel for you to end up yourself being an immigrant, then helping immigrants also coming
it was fantastic. I always felt elation when I got the letter back from Immigration New Zealand, or INZ for short, that said that the application from the client has been approved. That was such a great feeling to see that, because obviously there's the monetary side of things. The client pays you as a fee to get to do the work, but that's only just half of the reward. The other half of the reward is getting that feeling, that elation that it's been successful, that it hasn't been failed. Sometimes, applications will come back about to be declined, but immigration usually gives you a chance to respond to that application being declined, which is what's called a potential prejudicial information letter, and usually I have to come up with some sort of argument or reasoning as to why this person should stay here and they should get this visa. And so there was usually a bit of creativity, so taking some of my creative background and putting that into it and coming up with a strategy to explain why this person should get this visa. And it was a lot of fun, and it was very rewarding to see the success from that.
Yeah, it's also awesome to hear that. Me being an immigrant myself and having gone through all of that, but I have to say I did not seek advice from an immigration lawyer, just because I don't want to say naive, but I read through what I need. I checked out if I have all the documents, and I was pretty certain I collected every data I needed. And I was pretty much saying, okay, just send it in and see what happens. And I was lucky enough that it went through and that it went ahead and it was all good. But I had one moment where really my heart stopped, because I was coming on a working holiday visa, and I found a job, which was the job we talked earlier about, which was in the laboratory, and they wanted to keep me as well. And so they supported my application for a 3-year work visa.
Yes.
So I knew my final goal is to get a resident visa. But I also knew that might take a long time. At that time, it said it takes at least a year. And so I was like, okay, I will apply for my resident visa pretty much the same time I apply for my work visa. And then I just let it go and see what happens. And then I went overseas to visit my family, because I knew I wanted to stay longer in New Zealand. And there was a wedding from a friend and I wanted to surprise her. So I left New Zealand just for like a holiday. And then I got the message back from immigration for my work visa saying, we are not quite convinced yet. We still miss a few information about this and this. And I remember specifically coming through on my birthday. And I was shattered. I was like, oh my God, I'm here in Germany right now. I want to go back. New Zealand was the country of my choice now to work there for longer. And I was just absolutely afraid that I can't just go back, because now I had like a person I liked a lot, so potentially a boyfriend, and I wanted to just, create something and build a life in New Zealand. And so I had massive help from my company to figure it out, to find out what we can do. And they wrote a big letter saying why I'm the only person who can do that job, which was really helpful at that time, because in my area, I had already work experience for 7 years, while in New Zealand, it wasn't really a common thing. So in that case, I had a bonus. But I can only imagine how often people are struggling and they don't have this specific experience. And it's so easy to maybe miss a document, or with that whole law of you can only get it as an immigrant if no New Zealander actually can do that job. So that's what we call the labour market check, and that's a really big part of the work visa. Now, when I did immigration law back in between 2015 and 2018,
work visa applications were very different back then.
Yeah.
It was all the migrant who had to apply. And so they would have to be the one to complete the work visa form.
Yeah.
They would have to be the one to, get the immigration lawyer to reach out to the employer and let us to check out basically the employer's labour market check, which is essentially an advertising to Kiwis to see if they can do the particular role. The whole idea of the labour market check is that basically Immigration New Zealand and New Zealand in general wants to make sure that there's no suitable Kiwis that can take on the job that a migrant needs to fill. So if there are no New Zealanders or no Kiwis available, then the migrant can come and they can take on the job and they can obtain they will usually get a work visa. But that these days it's quite different than how it was back then. These days what we have now is the, I'm not sure if you've heard about it, it's called the employer accredited work visa.
I have seen some of them, yeah.
Yeah, so the employer accredited work visa now basically puts the onus on the employer instead of the migrant. Well, the migrant still has a thing to do themselves, but it basically puts the onus on the employer to sponsor the migrant for a work visa.
Yeah.
So it's basically a 3-step process. There's employer accreditation, which means that the employer must be accredited by Immigration New Zealand to hire migrants in the first place.
Yeah.
And there's actually a very useful tool on the immigration website that migrants can look up to see if an employer is accredited.
Yeah.
That should always be their first step. So whenever a migrant, whether they be overseas or here in New Zealand and they need an employer accredited work visa to increase their stay, they should always, when they're looking for jobs on Seek or on Trade Me, they should look up where the employer is accredited. If the employer is accredited, they're allowed to hire migrants, which is the first step, basically.
Yeah.
The second step is what's called basically the job check for employers to basically apply through immigration so they can hire migrants. And the way they do that is by completing the special application, which basically says that they've advertised for at least 2 weeks on an appropriate channel like Seek or Trade Me.
Yeah.
And if they have advertised for that particular period and no New Zealanders have come forward, then the job check will be approved usually.
Yeah.
And then we come to the final step, the third and probably arguably one of the most important steps, is the actual work visa step or the work visa application or the migrant check. And that's where the migrant then submits a work visa application.
Yeah.
And and that's when you send all your normal documents, your passport, your health documents, your police clearance certificate, just to check to make sure you haven't committed any crimes.
Yeah, yeah.
And and all the other documents like your the job offer that you've received, very important, the most important part, the job offer that you've received from your employer, your prospective employer.
Yeah.
And that should include the employment agreement and the job description. And the employment agreement must have all the, the important things in it, like the suitable pay rate, because I believe back then it didn't really matter what the pay was, but these days there's a special magic number that the pay rate has to be. So you can't actually get a work visa in this country anymore unless your pay is, I believe, $29.66 per hour.
Yeah.
If it's not that magic number, then immigration will likely decline you. There are exceptions for certain fields, like certain sectors like tourism and hospitality.
Yeah.
But generally, that's the special number, $29.66. So if all these factors come together, employer accreditation, the job check, and the migrant check come together, then an immigration officer will usually approve the visa. But if there's any problems or any discrepancies between the two, you can run into big problems. And a big problem, I'll give you an example, is trying to specify in the job advertisement that a particular person must speak a certain language, like Afrikaans or Punjabi or Hindi or something like that. You can't, there's no way a New Zealander is going to be able to, a usual normal Kiwi won't necessarily speak those languages.
Yes.
So how can they apply for a job if there's a language requirement there?
Yeah.
So if the employer screws up by doing something like that, the migrant is not going to succeed in, firstly, the job check will probably fail, but there's no way at the third step that a migrant will succeed in getting that work visa if the employer screws up by doing something like that. So what I'm saying is that the advertisement's really important.
Yeah, yeah.
Another example is if in the advertisement they want, say, a retail manager to come in and work in New Zealand for, they want someone who has a qualification, like a diploma level qualification, and at least 5 years experience. That's what the employer is advertising.
Yeah.
Now, you could have a migrant who has only 4 years experience, but doesn't have any qualification. Well, according to the special immigration rules, that's fine if they don't have a qualification, but they would need at least 3 years experience. So the migrant should be fine because they have 4 years experience.
Yeah.
But because the employer advertised the position for at least 5 years experience, and there could have been Kiwis that also only had 4 years experience, so they've gone with this migrant who only had 4 years, the immigration officer can see the discrepancy and they could decline the application.
Yeah.
So basically what I'm saying here for your listeners is that it's not just on the migrant, but on the employer himself or herself who could make a mistake and really screw up. So that's why it's really important to get some legal advice.
I actually find it super interesting. So thank you so much for going deeper into it and giving examples. And I think in my case, there was a little discrepancy, and that's why they probably got back to us first saying, hey, look, we don't really see how you gave New Zealanders the chance to actually apply. And we had to get it out on the market again. So, of course, I was
re-advertising.
Worried. But then how we got around it, or not around it, but how I still was able to get the job was they wanted a specific experience in the topic. Like I was working in a bee disease laboratory for 7 years, and they now started testing for a bee disease in their lab. And there was no way anyone from New Zealand could have the amount of experience in that field than I did, because it's a really niche topic, like bee disease. It's a big topic in New Zealand for honey and stuff, but actually testing and doing things with that disease was really small. So for me, it was such a big relief that no matter who was applying, wanted either so much more money and was from overseas, or was not having the experience, and therefore I was able to get the job and the work visa as well. But yeah, if someone else would have exactly the same experience I did, I would not have gotten it, right?
Yeah, because and it makes sense too, because, we want to support New Zealand citizens first.
Exactly.
They need to be able to get a job, and otherwise they could go on the benefit, and then it's a cost to the taxpayer. So
it totally makes sense.
It's why. But the more skills you have as a migrant coming into the country, obviously the better chance you have to get a work visa or a student, whatever visa that you need to get, and to eventually get that pathway towards New Zealand residence. Yeah, so it's really important to have those skills and that experience when you're making the application. Yeah.
So going back to what you just, when you started that whole topic around it, what I would find really interesting to know is, what would the employer need to do to actually become an accredited employer? Because obviously most companies would want to employ immigrants, but because nowadays, what do you have to do to become one? And then you said before that you always should check on their page if they are accredited or not. But how easy is it to see for people who apply as an immigrant to see if they are accredited? So these two questions.
Yeah, so to become accredited, I don't think it's too difficult, especially recently. So, and I'll just give some, just steering the topic for a second. So in the past few months, obviously we've had this election come up.
Yeah.
And basically the Labour government, because we were very close to hitting a recession, they wanted to boost up their numbers and show that the economy is doing better than what it is. So what they did was they basically opened the floodgates, so to speak, and allowed immigration to let in a whole bunch of people in a very short time. So the best time to actually apply for a visa was a couple of months ago, when everything was just being approved. And this is just based on my research and what I've been doing into the area. But in terms of getting for an employer to become accredited, I think it's a pretty simple process. They just have to make sure that they are basically that they've made profit within the last 12 months, continued profit. And so they'll look at the sustainability of the business, the business that's trying to hire migrants. If they're not sustainable and they're not making profit, then obviously, that potential migrant that gets hired there will probably not have a job in a few months' time, because the business might go bust. So that's really important. If they can improve that, if they can prove that they're sustainable and that they're making profit, they should be fine. But what they also need to do is they must also not have previously provided Immigration New Zealand with any false or misleading information. So really important that they haven't committed any crimes or any breaches in terms of immigration law, in terms of employment law, and for example, in terms of employment law, underpaying your staff, or basically giving your staff money under the table and not paying taxes. That's really big breaches that immigration will look into. And if an employer is making those breaches, they're unlikely to be, they'll have if they have their accreditation, they'll have it revoked, and they're unlikely to be accredited again. So so those couple of things are really important. In terms of the migrant being able to, look up to see whether an employer is credited. So what I would suggest that a migrant do, if they're, depending on whether they're overseas or in New Zealand, it doesn't matter. Go on Trade Me, go on Seek. I've recently done a bit of research into this, so I know how this works. But basically, there's a tool on the immigration website, and you should be able to do a quick Google search to put in Immigration New Zealand employer accredited tool, something along those lines, search tool or whatever it's called. What you can do is you can take a company like Fonterra, for example, and put Fonterra's name into the search engine, and it will come with the full company name, the business number, and it will say how many years this particular employer is accredited for. So Fonterra, for example, I've recently done the search for them. It produced one search result for them, for the company, and it said that they're accredited to, I believe, July 2024. So that obviously they have to reapply for accreditation at some point. But you can be rest assured by seeing that result that yes, I can apply with this particular employer or this particular company for a job if they've advertised on one of those websites. Thank
you. I had no idea.
So it gives a bit of certainty to migrants, which is really important. But at the same time, accreditation is just one part of the process. The big one that we've just been discussing is that labour market check, that advertisement, that again, it's the employer's responsibility. So, and what's really important for immigration as well is that the migrant is not paying for the first two steps either, because sometimes the employer if they're being a little bit dubious, or that they might try to make the migrant pay for these things. It's not the migrant's responsibility to pay for that. The migrant is only responsible for paying for the last step in the process, which is the actual work visa application. So immigration wants to make sure that the migrant is essentially not paying for a visa through some sort of employer corruption. Really important stuff.
Cool. I learned something new as well. Not that I need it anymore now, since I'm finally a permanent resident.
Oh, excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you. But still, a lot of people are still going through the process. I have a friend at the moment who's looking for a new employer just because he needs to have someone who is accredited to be able to stay. And therefore, I know it's just really important. And as you said, it's changing constantly. You mentioned before, there's no other area as a lawyer as like immigration, which is changing so often.
And the reason for why it changes so much is because immigration law is all policy based. So, there is an immigration act, so to speak. There is immigration legislation that doesn't get changed. But because it's all policy based, and people can look this up if they want to, if you type in Google Operational Manual New Zealand, it will the first link will come up with the immigration policy. And it is pages upon pages of rules that the immigration officers, when they're making the decisions of the migrant who's making an application, have to consider. So there's things like the genuine intention for the migrant to apply, making sure they have their health check is all right, that their character check's all right. There's all rules about all that sort of stuff. So anyone who's really into it can look into that, but that's usually what's left to the lawyer to look at and to assess and tailor to the migrant's particular case or circumstances. So because it's all policy based, the New Zealand government can basically just change it. Whoever's in power can just change it on a whim. And the reason they do that is basically all because they want more votes or they want to stay in power. So, or it's depending how the New Zealand public is feeling, which I think is a bit unfair for migrants, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because they're basically used as pawns to whoever is in charge and whoever the government is, essentially, depending on how the New Zealand public is feeling about migrants, whoever's in charge can basically turn on a switch, and they can make it harder for migrants to get visas, or they can make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
So, and it's a real shame because obviously, being a country like New Zealand, a modern country, a country that's, wants to bring people in with skills. I think obviously migrants would want that certainty and that they want stability in immigration policy and settings.
Absolutely.
And if it's unstable, then obviously people would be turned off by that and not be really keen to come in. So there has been a lot of changes to the policy, and I think some of those changes have been good. Back in when I was doing, full-time immigration work, there was a lot of migrant exploitation. And that was in the form of, migrants coming into the country with the promise of a visa from their employer and then getting paid well below minimum wage, perhaps being put in these various accommodation, really bad living arrangements, and no taxes were being paid, and basically circumventing the employment laws in New Zealand and the immigration laws in New Zealand, which was really, really bad. So in response to that, what, the New Zealand Labour government did was that they introduced this new employer-sponsored visa to make sure that the onus was on the employer to check that the employer was also suitable to hire migrants and that they were doing the advertisement properly, and then only at that point could the migrant apply.
Yeah. And I think that's the right way to go about it. I heard really horror stories, not necessarily about New Zealand, but, and maybe if that's actually true, that sometimes immigrants come over hoping for a better life, and then the employer is taking away their passports, and they can pretty much do everything with them.
It's basically there's a real big power imbalance between the employer and the migrant. And so the migrant won't speak out against the employer if they're taking away their wages, they're giving them taking away their passports. The reason why the migrant won't speak out against the employer is because they know that the employer has all the power, and they face the real risk of becoming an overstayer if their visa is not approved, and they have been sent back to their home country. And sometimes the situation in their home country is worse than what it is in New Zealand. And so migrants realise this. But just saying that, Immigration New Zealand did absolutely have a system in place that where migrants were being exploited, those people would not be deported. They would have a special visa given to them, so that they wouldn't dissuade people from, talking to immigration and saying, look, this particular employer is exploiting me. So it was really important to have those checks and balances in place to protect migrants, because migrants are certainly the vulnerable people.
Definitely.
In this.
I'm really happy to hear that there are certain rules in place to prevent those things from happening, or if they are happening, then at least the people don't feel like they can't talk to anyone. So that's really nice to know. What I also want to ask you, or better said, the audience ask a couple of questions. And I would love to bring them up and see if you can give us a little bit of an understanding of the situation they ask about. So one question one of the people had was, what are the most common misconceptions of living in New Zealand as an immigrant?
Common misconceptions. So you mean expectations that they had before coming here, that what life would be like, or?
I think the way I also understand the question is okay, what would immigrants think their life here would be like, and then talking to a lawyer being okay, this is very different from what I thought it would be.
I think they might think that they might get a much better pay, much better wages here, much better life. Perhaps they make some good connections here. New Zealand's culture is very different from a lot of cultures around the world. And if people are not willing to integrate into New Zealand culture, it's unlikely that they would be treated the same as everyone else, basically, or other people in various communities. So I think a lot of people should, if they're planning on migrating here to New Zealand, they should come in with an open mindset and come here with the expectation that things are not always necessarily greener on the other side as it is perhaps in their country. So certainly we have things that might be better than what they're used to, but certainly there's other things that are a lot harder, like, for example, getting a house, which is becoming a lot more unaffordable these days.
Yeah, thank you. Another question was, what are some really common scenarios that people seek immigration advice from an immigration lawyer?
Yeah. So the one of the most common things is if a visa had been declined previously.
Yeah.
And perhaps it was declined for health or character reasons.
Yeah.
So maybe someone has a disease or something, and that can be really hard because if an application is declined and the immigration department's not willing to look into it again, you basically have to go to the special tribunal called the Immigration Protection Tribunal.
Yeah.
And essentially that's a judge will consider the person's case and decide whether there are humanitarian reasons for that person to stay and not be, deported or having to return to their own home country. So that's one avenue that migrants can perhaps seek advice from an immigration lawyer. In my old practice, I saw a lot of people coming to me who perhaps they committed a driving offence. So in terms of crimes, it can be as minor as dangerous. I say minor, but it can be as little as dangerous driving, for example. And this is obviously not just an infringement, but speeding over the safe speed rules. And perhaps they were involved in a serious car accident, and they were prosecuted by the police and brought in front of the court. If their visa is declined on that basis, you would have to approach the situation with an immigration lawyer or advisor who would likely try and provide as many mitigating factors as possible to the immigration department to explain, yes, that this person had committed this crime, but this is why is it not so serious, and this is why this person should stay. Perhaps this person has a lot of family ties in New Zealand, which makes them want to stay, why they should stay here. Perhaps they have a lot of, they've done a lot of good in other areas. And perhaps their employer really needs them because they're quite specialised in their work. So, all these mitigating factors can help that person get a visa and help them get approved despite having that aggravating factor of committing a crime.
Yeah, so these two things are, like, if you see it overall, the most common ones you get questioned about.
I just give them as two big examples, but you can, if people were coming to us for immigration advice instead of doing it themselves, it's usually because there's something wrong with their case.
Yeah.
But another reason is perhaps they have they do have a straightforward case, but they're just a little bit unsure about the rules, and they would really want an immigration lawyer or advisor to give them that legal advice and to prepare their application for them, because they just don't want to run the risk of doing it themselves and falling into any issues. Because it does happen a lot when like I said, when it comes to these immigration policies and the way they can be changed on a whim, it does create stress for people when they're applying. And
100%.
Depending on the immigration officer you might get an officer who's very harsh on people and harsh on applications. There's no way to foresee which kind of person who's going to be checking your application, how easy they're going to be on it or how tough they're going to be. So having an immigration lawyer or advisor assists with that, especially if the application's about to be declined. Because like I said, in certain applications, the lawyer or advisor gets the chance to argue their case or their client's case. At that moment there, it's really important to get an immigration lawyer involved. And I would go as far as to say it's even more important to get them involved from the start, because the lawyer or advisor will make sure that there's no, because if there are potential problems that can emerge, the expert will make sure that those problems are solved before submitting the application to immigration, so they don't crop up in the first place.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. one more specific one, I would say, is someone who is probably considering moving as well. So the question is, how are my chances to immigrate as a German social worker with a Bachelor of Arts?
So that particular person, if they have, it depends. It really depends. I can't with that amount of information. It's a little bit limited for me. With a Bachelor of Arts, it really depends on what kind of job. At the end of the day, it all depends on what job that person is seeking here.
Yeah.
Without a job offer, there's basically no chance unless their purpose was to study here.
Yeah.
If they're coming here under a student visa, to study, then absolutely. And had an invitation to study here from an institute of some kind or a university, then that could be a pathway to come here.
Yeah.
Another pathway is just the standard visitor visa, and a lot of migrants come here just to take a look at the country. But with the visitor visa, you have to be very careful that you're not saying in your application, I'm here to work and find a job, because if you say that, immigration will be like, well, you're not a genuine visitor. You're not here to holiday or to visit someone. You're here to try and find work, so they'll decline you. So you've got to be very careful in that regards. But if you're here to find work and to look for work, then you need to, what I was talking about prior, go on to Seek, go on to Trade Me, look for companies who are offering work and see if they're accredited and if they perhaps would be amicable to hiring an overseas migrant. And usually that will involve some sort of dialogue with the employer, whether it be via email or via telephone call. And if they are amicable to doing that, then certainly that is the way to go and go through the accredited employer work settings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So it's pretty much just really giving them the idea of doing their research first and see if they are accredited, and then maybe getting in touch and see if they can.
Yes, especially if they're here looking for a work visa. If they're here, it really depends on the particular person's set of circumstances. What they're looking for. So if they're looking to study here, then they need to go through the study option. If they're looking to work here, and I bring up the work one a lot because the work one is really essential, because no matter where you are in terms of your journey, whether it's as a visitor, as a student, a worker, no matter where you are on your pathway towards residence, sooner or later you're going to have to get that work visa, because that's the way to get residence, unless you're bringing in a lot of money to the country as a big investor. That's the typical way to get residence under the skilled migrant category, or the work to residence settings, which is to find a job and an employer who's prepared to sponsor you for that role.
Thank you. So last question from the audience would be probably, in my opinion, quite funny, but not like it's a fair question, but a little bit of a funny one. So it is, why are immigration processes so unbelievable slow, even though we have quite a small amount of people, like a small population here in New Zealand?
So processing times, I think, are long and getting longer because perhaps Immigration New Zealand are understaffed. It can be as simple as that. It really depends, because I think the processing time sped up quite a lot actually in the last couple months leading up to the election, because Labour wanted to get in the Labour Party, of course, wanted to get in as many people as they could to turn up their numbers. So it probably sped up quite a bit, but it will go back to being slow now. It really depends on how long the immigration officer needs to take to process the application. I believe for the work visa application, the accredited employer work visa application, I think it's 59 days. But that's obviously only after the employer is accredited and the job check is approved. So this can take, a long time. And like I said, they're probably understaffed, or they've just got a mountain of work to get through, very busy. And, that's probably why they're so slow. So little country, but because of the little country, we actually get a lot of applications from people coming into us. And because we're a little country, Immigration New Zealand's probably understaffed.
Thank you for the really honest answer.
Yeah.
So I feel like I tortured you enough with like lots of questions about immigration law. And I usually end the episode with like 3 quick questions, which means it's like just a quick answer with one word or one sentence. But before I come to that, is there anything else you would like to mention today or you want to talk about?
I mean, I got lots of stories about my travel experiences and so forth, but it really depends if anyone's really interested in that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean,
I feel like that might be a really good one for a next episode.
Yeah, sure.
Like having a part 2, just because, I think a lot of people are interested in that whole law of immigration and the situation, and they would like to know how they can come. But a different story is then your personal idea about like traveling and your experience. And I feel like I could probably fill like a whole new episode with talking about your travel experience, since you mentioned
I'd love to do that.
17 different countries, which is also quite cool.
I've got lots and lots of stories about my journeys through those, and they're not all good. A lot of it is good, but certainly I was caught out in the rain, so to speak, on some of these little adventures that I had overseas. But I just love travel, and I love meeting people, and it's always great to see people come here from overseas. But I do want people to bear in mind that, like I said before, the grass is not always greener on the other side. In New Zealand, we have, unfortunately, an infrastructure problem, a lack of infrastructure in terms of housing, in terms of, jobs, and there's a big problem with wages being quite low compared to Australia, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
So, there are quite a few problems in our country, and it's going to take some time for those problems to be improved. But look, I don't want to deter anyone from coming over here either. The country has a lot of benefits in terms of the scenery and the amazing South Island, and the mountains and the nature, and it's a really nice, quiet place to live as well. There's, unlike Europe and the States, there's not, when you're walking in a city, for example, you're not surrounded by dozens and dozens of people all the time. So that's nice as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's perfect to have the pros and the cons, but also it really depends on what people are looking for, right? So in that case, everyone should just make their own decision after seeing the country, if that's the right thing for them. And that's why I really recommend for people to, if they want to visit the country first, as long as they state in their application form that they're visiting for a holiday purpose, they should do that. They should come and have a look at the country first, see if it's right for them, stay here maybe a month or 2 months, visit around, see if this is somewhere they want to live, and then decide, look, do I go back home or do I apply for a student or a work visa? I just want to again tell anyone who's listening, just please don't say anything in your visitor visa form that you're looking to work or study here, because there's a separate applications for those. You need to genuinely be here to visit first. Thanks for making that clear as well. So I will definitely be looking forward to have you on another episode to talk about your travels and your experience in that area.
I've got some funny stories, so
can't
I would
wait.
like to share them.
But for today, I would say we just finish it off with a quick 3 questions for you. So here's your first one to come. Where would you see yourself living if it's not New Zealand?
Ooh, that's a good question. I really like Italy. I think Italy is a really beautiful country with a lot of history and a lot of culture. See, the thing with New Zealand is that we've got beautiful nature over here, but we don't have the most amazing architecture. In fact, I would say that we don't have hardly any architecture at all. And I really love the cathedrals and the history in Europe. So it will definitely be a European country. And, the benefit of living in Europe is that you're just able to board a plane, and it's very inexpensive. There's cheap flights, and you can just go and travel anywhere in that country if you're living in the Schengen zone. So certainly a European country, and probably Italy because it's so beautiful. But then again, Italy of course has way too many tourists, perhaps for my liking. But cool.
I like Italy as well. I really would love to go and do like a whole round trip. So I'm hoping at one point I go back.
Have you been there?
Just once to Rome.
Okay.
And I found it, because I like the same thing. I like the architecture. I like the differences to my own country, different plants, different people, different cultures. So I really love to see the differences. And therefore there's lots and lots, like beautiful places, beautiful buildings.
Yeah, you have to check out the Amalfi Coast.
Yes.
Just the coastal towns along Italy are just so gorgeous. It's like nothing out of, like when you come to New Zealand, we have nothing like that over here. You know, I'm obsessed with those little, you know, cliffside towns and cliffside cities. They're absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So I really would love to see a little bit more. But as I always say, probably almost on every episode, I have such a long list of places I want to see. So one at a time. All right, number 2. Is there anything you still miss from your time in South Africa? Which might be harder.
It's hard. It's hard for me because I was so young, and most of my memories are gone from that time. I miss the beaches. The beaches were really nice. I grew up in a city called Port Elizabeth. It's got a different name now. They've done a whole change of the names, and I can't pronounce the new name of it. But the beaches were beautiful. The friends that I made there, the young friends that I had, were really nice. But it's just been such a long time. It's really hard for me to say. I can't go there about employment or about studying or about long-term friendships because I was just too young at that time.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair.
Yeah.
Cool. Last question. What do you love the most about New Zealand?
What do I love the most about New Zealand? Well, it won't be the food because we don't really have a food culture here. It won't be the architecture because we don't have architecture. But I guess it has to be, the nature is really amazing here. So if you're really into hiking like I am, and you like to go on these great walks, because we have quite a few great walks in this country, especially the Tongariro walk. I've never seen in all my travels on my, when I was in Europe for those 17 countries, or recently and when I was overseas again, I've never seen anything like the Tongariro Alpine crossing.
Yeah.
That just blew me away. And it's fine to see something in photos, but it's quite a lot different when you see something in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely the nature. Obviously the people are, once you integrate into the country and you get used to the culture, the people are quite lovely too.
Yeah.
But I'm just prefacing this by saying it does take a little while to get used to it.
Yeah, they need their time to warm up to you.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Richi, it was a pleasure to talk to you today, especially about the immigration side of things, but also just to get to know you a little bit more in that regard. And I'm really hoping that we can have another episode about your travel stories, because I'm sure you have quite a lot to tell us.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
And thank you so much for coming down and having this episode together. So thanks a lot. And
cheers.
Yeah. To everyone who's listening, I hope you enjoy it and you learned something. I learned something new again, even though I don't need to use it anymore. But for everyone who's interested in actually thinking about migrating, coming to New Zealand, living here, or just also wants to know a little bit more about how it works, then I think that's the right episode for you. And I hope that you will be able to enjoy it as much as I did. So thank you so much, Rich.
Cheers.
Bye.